What if I told you the salt in your shaker or the tea in your cup once brought empires to their knees? What if the sugar you stir into your coffee carries the weight of fallen kingdoms? These are not just ingredients. They are artifacts, silent witnesses to history's most brutal turning points. We think of war as generals and armies' great strategies and grand betrayals. But sometimes the fuse is lit in the kitchen. Sometimes the most profound conflicts begin with something as simple as a craving attacks or a single grain of spice. Today on Passport and Plate, we're uncovering the 7 foods that actually started wars. These stories are not about good guys and bad guys. History is rarely that clean. And how the contents of your pantry hold the keys to understanding the rise and fall of empires. Salt. It's simple. It's everywhere. It is the mineral of life itself. Kings and emperors knew this. If you control the salt, you control the people. In 18th century France, this truth became a weapon. The monarchy imposed a brutal salt tax known as the gabelle. It was a hated, corrupt system. The rich, the nobles, the clergy, they paid little or nothing. But the poor, the working people, the farmers, they were crushed under its weight. Sound of a distant murmuring crowd and a single mournful cello note. Imagine being a baker. Imagine being a mother. Imagine being a fisherman. You were legally required to buy a certain amount of salt at a fixed, exorbitant price, directly from the king's collectors. You couldn't use cheaper salt from the sea to preserve your fish. You couldn't buy it from a smuggler, or you'd risk prison or worse. This wasn't just a tax. It was a daily humiliation. It was a constant reminder that your life was not your own. The taste of your bread, the preservation of your winter food, was all held hostage by a distant, indifferent crown. Anger simmered. The gabelle became a symbol of everything that was rotten in the Ancien Regime. Tea. It's a ritual, a moment of calm, a civilized pause in a chaotic day. But in Boston, in 1773, it was a declaration of war. The British Empire, vast and powerful, was also deeply in debt. To raise funds, it decided to tax its American colonies. They taxed paper, they taxed glass, they taxed paint, and they taxed tea. For the colonists, this was not about the price of a beverage. It was about a principle. They had no voice in the British Parliament. They had no say in these laws. They called it tyranny. No taxation without representation. Sound of lapping harbor water, sound of creaking wood, sound of a lone, defiant fife melody. The anger focused on the tea. The British East India Company, a corporate behemoth of its day, was given a monopoly. It could sell directly, undercutting local merchants and reinforcing the hated tax. 3 ships laden with British tea sat anchored in the harbor. On a cold December night, the protest turned to action. A group of men, members of the Sons of Liberty, disguised themselves as Mohawk warriors. Under the cover of darkness, they boarded the 3 ships. They worked in silence and with grim purpose. They smashed them open with axes, and they dumped the contents into the cold, dark waters of Boston Harbor. The sea turned brown with ruined tea. This act was not a drunken riot. It was a calculated political statement. It was a direct challenge to the authority of the British Crown. They closed the port of Boston. They stripped Massachusetts of its self-governance. The act of destroying tea had lit a fuse. The fight was no longer about taxes. It was about freedom. A revolution was brewing. Nutmeg, cloves, cinnamon. The smell of a faraway market, of warmth, of holiday baking. In the 16th and 17th centuries, that smell was the scent of unimaginable wealth. It launched 1,000 ships and ended countless lives. Spices were the oil of their day. They grew only in a few remote corners of the world, like the tiny Banda Islands. Small, dried seeds worth more than their weight in gold, and they were willing to kill for them. Sound of gamelan mixed with the distant crash of a cannon and the cry of a tropical bird. First came the Portuguese, then the Dutch. The VOC was a corporation with its own army and navy, given the power to wage war, negotiate treaties, and establish colonies. Its goal, a complete monopoly over nutmeg and mace. To achieve this, they needed to control the source, by any means necessary. Paradise was about to become a hell on earth. The Dutch governor, Jan Pieter Zoon Cohen, was a man of ruthless ambition. He saw the Bandanese not as partners, but as obstacles. When they resisted, he unleashed a campaign of terror. In 1621, he landed on Lontor with nearly 2,000 soldiers. They burned villages, destroyed food supplies, and systematically slaughtered the local population. Thousands were executed, starved, or enslaved. Of 15,000, fewer than 1,000 survived. The islands were repopulated with Dutch settlers and slaves, forced to work the nutmeg groves. The company had its monopoly. Ships returned laden with spice. Shareholders grew fantastically wealthy. The warm scent in Europe carried the stench of genocide. A pastry shop. A place of comfort, of simple pleasure. The smell of butter and sugar. But in Mexico City in 1838, a dispute over damaged pastries became the absurd pretext for war. A French pastry chef named Remontel owned a small shop. He claimed army officers looted his shop, ate his pastries, and refused to pay. Ignored in Mexico, he appealed to the King of France. France, under Louis Philippe, was looking for an excuse to flex and collect debts. An ultimatum: pay 600,000 pesos, covering many French grievances. Mexico wouldn't accept. France sent the navy. A blockade strangled Veracruz. The pastry war had begun. The fighting was real. The port was bombarded. Mexican soldiers fought back fiercely, including Antonio López de Santa Anna, who lost his leg and had it buried with full military honors. A conflict born of farce but fought with blood. With British mediation, Mexico paid. The French withdrew. The pastry chef got his money. But the war left a bitter taste. A powerful nation can use the smallest, most ridiculous pretext to bully a weaker one. Sometimes history is not just tragic, but profoundly absurd. Cod. Not an elegant fish. Not a beautiful fish. It's a plain workhorse fish of the cold North Atlantic. For centuries, it fed coastal communities, salted and dried, fed people through long winters, traded across continents. It was protein, it was money, it was survival. In the 20th century, it became a cause for war between Iceland and the UK. Not with armies, tense confrontations on the frigid seas, the cod wars. Sound of a ship's horn bellowing through thick fog, the metallic scrape of steel on steel, and the roar of a patrol boat's engine. Iceland depended on fishing. Its cod stocks were dwindling. Huge advanced trawlers, primarily British, swept the waters. In 1958, Iceland extended its fishing zone from 4 to 12 nautical miles. The British refused to accept it and sent trawlers escorted by the Royal Navy. Strange, dangerous skirmishes, cutting trawl nets, rammings, hulls scraped, shots fired as warnings. A high-stakes game of chicken in treacherous seas. Icelandic sailors became national heroes. David versus British Goliath. It was about protecting existence. In the 1970s, Iceland extended to 50 miles, then to 200 miles. They even threatened to leave NATO. In the end, Iceland won. The 200-mile exclusive economic zone became international law. The Cod Wars. Food security is national security. A nation will fight for the right to feed itself. Sugar. Well, it's the ultimate temptation. A rush of pure pleasure. We crave it. We celebrate with it. But the history of this sweet white crystal is one of the darkest. Once a royal luxury, then a sweeping European hunger. It was added to tea, to coffee, to chocolate. An insatiable sweet tooth built a monstrous new economy and fueled empires. The place where hunger met supply was the Caribbean. Perfect for Cain. Hellish work. Backbreaking, dangerous, relentless. Europeans and indentured servants couldn't or wouldn't do it. Planters turned to enslaved people from Africa. Thus, the triangle trade. Goods to Africa, people to the Americas. Sugar and rum back to Europe. Plantations were machines turning human lives into wealth. Profits were astronomical. Sugar money funded industry, built cities, paid for armies and navies. Control of the sugar islands was a strategic prize. Sweetness in London was tied to bitterness in Jamaica or Haiti. This brutal system lasted centuries and began to crumble when the enslaved rose up. The Haitian Revolution. Sugar's history is a profound, uncomfortable truth. Some of our greatest pleasures are rooted in some of the greatest pains. During the Napoleonic Wars, sugar scarcity drove innovation. Europe raced to beat sugar, reshaping economies and supply. Across the Caribbean, empires clashed for cane. Islands changed hands. Fortunes rose and fell on sugar. Remember the cost behind the sweetness. The banana. It's a friendly fruit. Simple, cheap, available everywhere. Late 19th and early 20th centuries. In Central America, this humble fruit became a symbol of corporate power and imperial overreach. American fruit companies, like United Fruit, Honduras, Guatemala, Costa Rica. They bought vast lands, built railroads and ports, private empires. Distant train whistle, jungle insects, Latin-style guitar. Not just businesses, political forces, often stronger than local governments. They controlled land, infrastructure, jobs, paid little tax, treating nations as fiefdoms. Thus, the term banana republic. The human cost was immense. Poverty wages, company towns, lives controlled by foreign employers. Attempts to unionize met swift, often brutal resistance, with local militaries in their pocket. They made and broke governments. 1954, Guatemala. President Jacobo Arbenz pursued land reform. It threatened United Fruit Holdings. The company launched a massive propaganda campaign, painting Arbenz as a communist threat. The CIA orchestrated a coup, overthrowing a democracy. A military dictatorship friendly to American business was installed. A simple fruit helped topple a government. Behind the sweetness, power, profit, and profound consequences. So we've journeyed from the salt mines of France to the cod-rich waters of the North Atlantic. We've seen the blood spilled for spices and the democracies toppled for bananas. What does it all mean? It means that food is never just food. It is a story of power, of desire, and of the often violent collision between the two. The salt, the tea, the sugar on your table are not just commodities. They're the sanitized end of a long, bloody supply chain. Artifacts of conflict, quiet trophies of forgotten wars. These stories teach a crucial lesson. When a single food becomes incredibly valuable, when access to a basic food is threatened, conflict often follows. Greed conquers islands for a spice. Desperation declares war over a fish. Pride turns a pastry dispute into a blockade. The reasons change, the foods change, but the pattern remains. This struggle is as old as history, fought on every continent. But there is a glimmer of hope. We learn. Slowly, painfully, we learn. The Cod Wars shaped the law of the sea. Sugar's horrors fueled abolition and reshaped human rights. Banana imperialism sparked nationalist movements. We were forced to confront the cost of food and to build systems, however imperfect, for equity and security. Next time you sit down to a meal, take a moment. Look at what's on your plate and the path it took through history. Every meal is a history lesson. Every flavor has a story. Recognize the power and politics in our food to build a fairer, more peaceful world.